Hello everyone. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I have sometimes wondered if the fear is out there in the world, in the cold caress of wind on an open window or the shriek of a creaking stair, or inside us, deep within like a parasite that only quickens when alone. My story is one I tell reluctantly, nor do I relish its telling, but if I set it down, perhaps I can sever its grip. It began at the tail end of October, when the wind became keen and the shadows stretched out in new commitment. My parents had taken their infrequent break, an anniversary trip to the beach, and I'd complained that I'd be okay alone. I was a second-year university student, hardly an adult, and had to prove I could hold myself up in our two-story old home, which stood modestly at the edge of a wooded subdivision. The house, as cozy as it was, became other when they left. Something small, a kind of quiet that no longer seemed peaceful but rather vigilant. The day passed and was still. Homework was completed, coffee was brewed, the sun crept slowly across the boards. In bed early, rocked by the gentle creaking of the wooden frame, familiar sounds since childhood, once soothing. It wasn't until the second evening that I could sense it, the change. At 3:11 a.m., I woke to no noise, but to some sense of exposure, as if I'd left a door open. My chest was bound with fear, inexplicable but acute. I froze in bed, my gaze fixed upon the darkness above. The wind was screwing the windows like sluggish fingernails across glass. I rationalized it away as nothing. The third day, the air in the house became thick. The air itself was heavy, heavier. I caught little things, the glass that I hadn't touched in the drying rack, the hallway light on when I know I turned it off. Each strange occurrence was small, explainable, but they mounted atop each other like a growing weight upon my shoulders. But I retained sanity, assuring myself that distraction and terror had created the illusion of loss. By the time the sun set, I had shut all the doors and windows with anxious attention. I left lights on in vacant rooms, hoping they would give the impression of being occupied. Despite this, a gnawing feeling took hold, the sort of feeling that somehow seems to possess the ability to feel as though someone, or something, is sitting just at the periphery of your field of vision. I again woke at 2 a.m., this time to a distinct, unmistakable sound. The steps creaking, slow, deliberate. Not the creak of settling wood, but the deliberate shifting of weight against worn steps. Steps I'd walked for years and could walk blindfolded. Wind there was not, rain nor anything else that would excuse the sound. I lay frozen under the sheets, the quiet of my own breathing the only companion to the deliberate, agonizing creaks that curled their way up toward my bedroom door. But they did not. Silence followed, torturous and interminable. I remained immobile for what felt like hours. Morning eventually dawned, pale and hesitant. When I finally emerged from my room, the house was again deserted. I flung open every door and window. All was in order. But I couldn't shake the memory of that sound. I avoided class that day, not to leave the house ajar. I felt like I had been cheated into solitude. The corners curved inward. Shadows crept into the mirrors that weren't mine. I stopped looking at them altogether. I did not sleep that evening. Instead, I stood in the hallway with lights burning against the wall, a kitchen knife loosely gripped in my hand. Hours went by. Nothing happened. And something changed inside of me anyway. Fear had stopped being an emotion. It had become a kind of existence. I began wondering about everything. Had I indeed heard the sounds, or did exhaustion etch out a trick? Was I unraveling with the strain from my own brain? On the fifth evening, I once again left the upstairs and downstairs lights on, but I was still locked away in my bedroom. I jammed a chair in front of the door, not because it worked, but as a symbol of defiance, a useless symbol at that, a gesture to try to pretend that I wasn't cowering in fear in my own home. I didn't want to believe that I cowered in fear in my own home. that the place that was meant to protect me now seemed like a prison. At 3:06 a.m., I woke up to the television. It was on, downstairs. I hadn't left it on. All of my strands longed to ignore it, to burrow beneath blankets to wait for the sun. But some force subdued fear, and force induced by necessity and madness. I had to know. I descended the stairs, each one shaking beneath my feet. The TV flashed wildly in the living room, just filling with static. That wasn't natural on its own. We hadn't had cable for over a year. The screen glimmered a wild white light across the furniture, distorting shadows unnaturally. I turned it off. When the screen went dark, I was looking at my own face, but something was not right. Behind me, in the mirror, there was a presence. Quiet, motionless, faceless. I spun around. Nothing. Just the stillness of the room, the muffled hum of appliances, the echo of my own terror. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't scream. I was frozen there, locked in, until the numbness returned. That same numbness of unreality settled around my senses, and I lurched upstairs and locked the bedroom door. That night, however, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed until morning, my body coiled and taut, my eyes painful and unshed. The person that I'd seen, or imagined I saw in the television set, stayed with me like the acrid smell of smoke after a blaze. It wasn't only fear that I then felt, but desecration, as if something had ripped the veil of reality just so that it could step through. I no longer felt safe where I was. My childhood home was no longer my home. It was somewhere I didn't know. I'd gone out of the house that morning, too agitated to remain at home one moment longer. I walked blindly up and down town, from store to store in a daze. Outside, everything was as it had always been, unaltered. People laughed, walked, sipped coffee. No one guessed what I carried. No one ever would if I said anything. When I returned finally, the sun was low, and the house walls glowed gold and crimson. It looked almost pretty on the outside, almost right. That impression was destroyed the instant I pushed open the door. The interior was cold still, as if it had been holding its breath during my absence. I found something new waiting for me. On the kitchen table, where I would first notice it, lay one of our old spoons, one that we hadn't used in years. The set had been stored away and hidden in the attic years ago, replaced by new ones. It just lay there, shining clean in a row as if it had just come out of storage. I hadn't been in the attic for months. I didn't touch it. I did, however, search room by room, every door, every drawer, every closet. The attic ladder was shut and I did not open it. I was no longer searching for a burglar. I was searching for an explanation, something tangible. But there was nothing, only the same creeping sensation of being watched. I was seated in my corner on the floor, one corner of the bed that night, clutching the knife tightly so the skin between my thumb and knuckle whitened. My gaze stayed focused on the door. I was observing, waiting. My brain rewound piece by piece, much like fibers come unraveled off of tattered cloth. Sleep refused me. Cogency failed me too. In some place after night had descended, movement resumed again. Not the steps, though, but something much more sinister. Scratching. Flashes of light, randomly scratching as though from outside the walls, just on the headboard of my bed. Not rodents scritching. Too precise, like with human nails, scraping against wood and plaster. I leaned against the wall. The scratching stopped. And then, just loud enough for me to question if I'd finally gone crazy, I heard breathing. Low, slow, wet. I did not scream. I did not blink. I remained there for hours, my ear against the chill of the wall, listening to the breathing of something that didn't belong. At dawn, I could step back. I moved out the door, looked down the hallway. Silence, emptiness. But I no longer believed in those things. I phoned my parents that morning. I had told them that I changed my mind, that I was sick, that I needed them to return. They were not that excited to begin with, telling me to keep quiet and not to get hysterical. But I did not listen. I was determined, in fact. Whatever it was about my voice that made them decide to go and seek assistance for me, something made them reassess what they told me. It was supposed to have freed me, but it didn't. Because on that day, everything changed. I left the lights on, all of them. I barricaded myself in my bedroom once more, thinking I could get through one more night. I curled up on the floor once more, knife gripped tightly in my hand, waiting for the blackness to finally descend upon me. It did, but it did not fall alone. At precisely 2:37 a.m., the lights in the house began to flash. Not on and off though, but pulsating, as something otherworldly crawled down the wiring itself. The sound again, scratching, not behind the wall this time, but under the bed. And then the closet door slowly and laboredly creaked open. Not so much opening, but breathing. Yes, breathing. That same wet, deliberate breath. Then, footsteps. Not slow as they used to be, but quick as light, almost playful. They ran down the corridor, up and down the stairs, around the bedroom like a cat with a mouse. I held the knife tightly. My hands were slick with sweat. My heart was racing so violently I thought it would explode. I wanted to cry, to pray, to vanish. But I remained motionless, as if movement would be a signal, an invitation for the horror to open itself in all its terror. And then, without warning, the lights went out. Total, strangling darkness. The house was quiet. And then, on the ground, inches from where I sat, I heard it speak. One sound, not a word, not a scream, but a laugh. Short, guttural, human, and yet not. It formed out of the blackness next to me. I could sense the warmth of breath on my face. I flailed the knife around, struck nothing but air. I did not scream until it was almost torn from my lips, and I ran. From the house, down the stairs, out into the night. I did not stop running until I was on the neighbor's lawn. They took me in, frightened, confused. I tried to explain to them, but I couldn't quite place what happened. I just told them that I had been seeing things and hearing things and I could not stay at home alone. They forced me to sleep on their couch. That was the last night that I ever spent alone in this house. When my parents returned the next day, I would not go back into the house with them. We searched the house room by room. Everything was just as it was supposed to be. The knife that I had dropped could not be found. The spoon on the table was gone. There were no signs of entry, no signs of anything. But I knew. I knew something had been there, and yet I suspect, I believe, that it never passed. My parents, in spite of their initial doubt, could not avoid the change within me. I was not the same boy who had been abandoned only days before. My hands trembled for no reason. My eyes flicked at movement that did not exist. The light switch my best friend, and quiet my worst enemy. I tried to pick up where I had left off. I tried to sleep in my own bed with my parents around me. I tried to tell myself that what I had witnessed was some collapse of the mind, a private tempest of hallucinations induced by loneliness and fear. But deep within I knew what happened was real as the flesh on my bones. Nothing for weeks. No laughter, no scratching, no lights at 2:37 a.m. But the quiet wasn't calming. It was stifling. It was the silence of something watching, waiting. The nightmares began then. Subdued, lucid nightmares about that dark figure curled on the floor next to my bed. Its limbs were all oversized in the nightmares. Too long, too thin. It never moved its mouth. It just gazed, like it was trying to commit each feature of my soul to memory. I woke up soaked, dry-mouthed, heart thudding as if I'd sprinted away from something gigantic. I came to stop sleeping entirely. I quit less than 6 months afterward, long before college made it compulsory. I left that house with no intention ever to return. My parents thought I was fleeing memories, trauma, my own shattered nerves. They were wrong. I was fleeing something else, something still stuck in that house like a leech in the walls. Years passed. I couldn't get the memories out of my head. I had healed enough to be able to learn to smile once more, to talk without trembling at the base of my voice. I talked myself into believing maybe it was all some sort of nightmare psychiatric episode, that the house was haunted in my head. Until last week, my dad called to tell me he and my mother were taking a short trip. He teased me half seriously. Would I mind sleeping in the house for a couple of nights, watering plants, watching the property? I said no, definitely, nicely, courteously. I offered to pay someone for a service instead. He laughed and promised me not to fret. He informed me of something that I shall never ever forget. We've been noticing odd sounds up in the loft recently. Steps, sort of. Possibly the old wood creaking or something crawling into the loft, too. I was white. I asked him how frequently the noises were noticed. His tone shifted ever so slightly, pondering, curious. It's unusual, actually. Every time at 2:37 a.m. I let go of the telephone. I haven't gone back since, and never will, because some houses never forget. Some things you let in once never go outside. The home was vacant for almost a decade prior to my purchasing it. A worn, weathered, and aged Victorian home, battered by time and weather, gently tilting to the left as if sharing secrets with the ground. It was the final house on the list in my search, overlooked, hidden beneath years of abandonment, and priced for an amount that made no financial sense given its dimensions. But something attracted me to it, something outside the realm of logic, reason, or prudence. I was a private man by nature. I did not need companionship or the sounds of the city. My research as a historian required quiet and solitude, two things the house had in plenty. It stood on a tract of country land dotted with dead trees and vacant fields. The closest neighbor was virtually 2 miles from it, a thing I did not take lightly. I wanted the house for quiet. I got something entirely different. When I walked through the door, I felt a terrible wrongness. The air was stale, far too stale, like time inside its walls had ceased to exist. Dust was on the wood floors thick, and the wallpaper bubbled like putrid skin to reveal bone-white plaster underneath. But in midst of all that decay, the house breathed. I could sense it, in the groaning of the floorboards beneath my feet, in the soft creaking of the stairs, in the soft rhythmic tapping which appeared to be coming from the walls at irregular intervals. I attributed it to old buildings and overactive nerves. I found that I had read more on how easily the mind could create phantoms from infrasound, psychological priming, and environmental stimulation, so I was wiser than to be afraid. But I started recording so-called anomalies, if only to remind myself that I was still sane. My first night in the house was fitful. I slept in the master bedroom, walls and floor cluttered with piles of books and boxes, and I listened as the house whispered. Gentle scratching behind the walls, muffled knocks upstairs in the attic, and something else. A low, thrumming presence I could not find. It was not a noise, really, but a pressure, a weight, as if the air itself was bearing witness to some hidden pain. Weeks went by, then months. I gave myself over to the work of restoring the house. The house had a lot of work to be done on it, refloored, rewired, exterminated. But I enjoyed every job, every inch of progress. But as each improvement was made, the air became more menacing. I felt like I was watched all the time. Mirrors reflected tiny distortions, fleeting shadows that disappeared when examined closely. Cold spots broke out and disappeared randomly. Doors which I had closed would be discovered open. Windows which closed tight would be open in the mornings. And then the dreams started. They weren't dreams, not in the normal sense. They were intrusions, disturbing, twisted, uninvited. I'd shut my eyes and find myself in strange rooms, hearing bodiless men speak lines of violence in unbroken silence. There was no sound but the existence of fear, a raw and daunting fear that made my heart shatter long after I awoke. I remember one dream clearly. I stood in what seemed to be the same house but centuries earlier. The walls were spotless, the air was warm, but there was blood, gripping amounts of blood, seeping into the floor, flowing out of the ceilings. gushing from hidden wounds in the very walls. There was a woman standing in the midst of the room, her arms up in a supplicating gesture, but there was no mouth. None at all. Her eyes found mine, and though she spoke not a word, I heard her, or at least I knew what she was saying. "You're inside now." I awoke on the floor, having sleepwalked out of bed. My fingernails were ripped, bleeding. They told me I'd been scratching at the floorboards in my sleep. My own actions went downhill from there. I stopped believing in the mirrors, I covered them all. My sleep was erratic and restless. My appetite diminished. The originally friendly solitude of the place was now a prison, and a shrinking one. I found myself resisting to enter into some of its rooms after dark. The cellar especially seemed to exhale an ill will which fretted my flesh. I was not able to coax myself down its stairs. It was then that I discovered the journal. It was hidden behind a loose panel in the study, wrapped in moldy linen and tied with dry twine. Its pages were old, yellowed, water-stained, brittle, but the script was readable. It was the work of a physician named Edwin Mallory, who'd lived in the house in the 1890s. His entries started with everyday descriptions, weather, patients, harvests, but progressively grew darker. He spoke of his fixation on pain, its sacredness, its revelation. He had experimented on vagrants and transients who visited the property. He believed that the house had provided him with visions, revelations about what human pain is. He explained to me that pain was a doorway, and the house the key. He spoke of rituals, of mystical languages which he had never spoken and suddenly could speak in dreams. His final entries were nonsense, a whirlpool of madness with pages covered in blinding, scrawling lines and meaningless symbols that meant nothing to me. Towards the end of the diary, there was one sentence that repeated again and again in mad repetition. "It's not the house. It's what the house remembers." I could not go on maintaining the pretense after reading the diary that I was having these experiences as part of imagination or mind fatigue. Things gained speed. I started seeing things, solid, clear, detailed, faces looking from crevices, body shapes moving in the corners where room was not to be stood, blood disappearing even before it would be cleaned off, and the voice, that vile voice, talking right into my head, not in English, but in a twisted dialect that sounded below the level of comprehension. I tried to get away. I wrapped up a bag, took my keys, and approached the door. It would not open. Not stuck, not locked, just nothing. The wood had fused to the frame. Windows shatter but only open into blackness, not the world outside. My phone ceased to function. The compass spun wildly. The air inside grew heavy, stifling. The light diminished, as if the sun itself had receded from the property. I was alone. Worse than being alone, I was observed. The house no longer lied. It was revealed. Walls that oozed blood when you touched them. Floors that throbbed like a living organism. Stairs that receded from you into darkness. I walked, lost, through corridors that disobeyed physics. Rooms were copied, ceilings disappeared, and the house lay out in an impossible shape. My mind shattered. I lost count of days. I forgot my own name. I ceased eating, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed to. I don't know how long I was there. Time had no place in the house. I was as a thought could be, free, floating. Then there was the voice once more, omnipotent, clear, triumphant. "You are part of the memory now." I woke up in the basement. It was not as I remembered. The room was huge, lit with a soft red light from cracks in the ground. The walls were filled with artifacts, implements of torture, old instruments, bones laid out like trophies. In the center was a stone altar, streaked with thick yellow grime. Elaborately etched symbols covered the surface, marks I had seen in Mallory's diary. They shifted when I looked at them, twisting into obscene and seductive shapes. I saw then that the house did not desire my flesh. It desired my experience, my awareness. It desired the history of my suffering, the psychogram of my collapse. All my fears, ever so much as known to me, were recorded, mirrored, and used against me as a club. The house survives memory, but not memory in any ordinary sense. It requires trauma, horror, despair destroying identity. It is a living archive of pain, each of its denizens another chapter in its endless book. I don't know if I ever escaped. I am writing this in the study, or rather what is a study. The door is again open, the light comes back each day, and yet, I am still not allowed out. When I attempt to do so, the world shatters, and I am standing once more at the stairs descending into the basement. The journal is missing. My reflection has not come back. I eat food, but it provides no nourishment. I sleep, but it finds no rest. I've become a shard, an echo in the immortal mind of the house. Maybe I am now just a story, told once more to the next wretched victim who walks through the door. Maybe that was what the voice was trying to say. Not a warning, but a blessing. The house doesn't haunt. It remembers. And I do too now. I saw the pattern eventually. There were breaks, brief moments when the house grew quiet. In these times I could think straight, move through the halls without the house resisting me. I started to think that maybe, if I knew the nature of the memory, I could unravel the hold it had on me. This wasn't possession the way people might imagine. It was holding on. A storage shed of grief. I wasn't a visitor. I was an archive. I walked stubbornly again. While I outlined the moving structures, drawing hand-sculpted sigil doorway patterns out of Mallory's sketchbook, days seemed for naught for the most part. But then, around back in the tight hall by what had formerly been the linen closet, the room awaited me. It was black inside, not dark, but lacking. My lantern's light was devoured the instant it passed the threshold. The earth was warm in the area between my feet. The air was charged with expectation, as if 1,000 lips in a virtual silence just beyond hearing. On the opposite wall hung a mirror, the only mirror which I had left unedited. I moved forward, uncertain whether I sought enlightenment or catastrophe. My face stared back, but it wasn't mine. The face in the mirror had my features, but its own animation. Its eyes were wrong. Boundless space filled with twisting darkness. It smiled, but I did not. Then it stretched out a hand, and 1,000 faces poured into my mind at once. Not memories, but souls. I have watched the woman without a mouth. A boy trapped in a crawl space for years. A soldier compelled to endure a slaughter. A priest who heard sounds in the walls until he pulled out his eardrums. I have watched Edwin Mallory with blank eyes, weeping as the walls soaked up his dying breath. They weren't ghosts. They were entries, written into the house's bottomless book. And I saw myself, every moment that I had ever lived within these foul walls, from the first tentative step inside to fear in my sleep to this very breathing. The figure gazed, and with ghastly clarity I knew. I was harvested. Myself, my person, had been read, sorted, and shelved. The mirror shattered along the line, and the house burst into flames. But the fires were not fire. They were memory, exploding from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. I was encircled by the screaming of every soul held captive in this building, and the noise was blinding, a montage of unadulterated agony. The building heaved and groaned like a living thing in agony. I collapsed to the floor, stationary, unable to breathe. The mirror exploded into dust, and with it, something within me shattered. Darkness had fallen. I woke up lying on the lawn outside the house. Early sun slanted drowsily through trees. Birds were singing. My car was parked in the driveway, unaltered by time. The house towered above me, silent, motionless, as if nothing whatever had happened. I attempted to rise, staggered, dazed. The burden I'd carried all those years felt discarded. My skin no longer crawled. My heart was my own again. I went away without looking back. Weeks went by. I was back in society, in the ordinary. Food shopping, deadlines, small talk. But I was still racked, not with fear, but with uncertainty. Had any of it happened at all? Was it some sort of breakdown into madness brought on by solitude? A psychotic breakdown, maybe, brought on by lack of sleep and stress? I nearly convinced myself of it until the photographs arrived. They arrived in an unmarked envelope, slipped into my mailbox with no return address. There were black and white photographs, grainy, moldy, of the house, but not the house I knew. On the photographs it was charred, collapsed, caved in on itself like a body burned to ashes. The last photograph was taken from the inside, somehow, and it had me in it, sitting in the study gazing at the journal, eyes wide open, lips moving in silent reading. But I hadn't remembered that incident. The photo was taken top down from the ceiling as if the house had taken the picture. One night, I woke and my mirror was crying. Thin trails of blood drooled down the glass, and etched in its center were the words, "You left the house, but the house did not leave you." I have not slept since then. I do not dream anymore. I do not think anymore. The human beings around me speak, but their voices come to me as echoes, far away and indistinct. I am no longer sure where I end and the house ends. The world altered. Dyes diluted, sun paler. Sound is muffled, as if transmitted through water. I am tethers to something lying deep below the level of things, a second reality opening out beneath the surface one, and sometimes between seconds I sense it breathing. The house, not as building but as presence. It persists now. I don't see it, but feel its rooms in every closed doorway. Every elevator I enter is a vertical coffin. Every corridor is stretched just a little too far. Every closed doorway makes me recall the times. It will be open once more. And when I am, I know I shall come back. For I am now part of its collection, and stories once spoken are never unsaid. As long as I can remember, I have had this appeal to solitude, not so much by choice, but by some ill-defined undertow of temperament. I enjoyed quietness and dissonant comfort in isolation. I was 30 when I bid farewell to the city's incessant clamor and bought a small stone cottage way out in the Carpathian Mountains. It was isolated, ringed by forests of black fir that stretched on forever in all directions, their somber silhouettes like sharpened knives against the sky. The house itself was ancient, constructed by some forgotten hand in some forgotten century. Its walls were gigantic, its roof high and tiled in slate, and its floors groaning unevenly over antique wooden planks, smoothed to a glimmer by the years and dented by each tread. There was a cellar down below that had been filled years prior to my purchasing the house. The elderly man who used to live in the house in his remaining years in an old people's home once grumbled something of the same to me. His voice had weakened considerably, as if to speak out would stir something that was better left undisturbed. He only spoke to me apart from the words, "There are rooms in that earth not for men." I set it aside, of course. Country folks have superstitions, at least country folks born between stones and fogs of mountains and valleys. But his voice lingered with me like the cold percolating that still hung in the wind. I came in the early winter. The snow had recently fallen, covering the pine trees in hush. The days were short and nights dark and long, heavy with darkness that was nearly alive. The cold was pitiless, penetrating all surfaces, and even though I warmed myself in front of the crackling, popping fire, I woke to frost on the windowsills. It was on such a night, as the wind whooshed past with a ghostly rhythm, that I first heard it. A rhythmic, far-off sound that drummed against the floorboards. It was neither the creaking of wood nor the scurrying of mice, but something beneath, something deliberate. It had the beat of knocking. 3 knocks, nothing more, always 3. I attempted to dismiss it. The wind, the wood, the groaning of the old bones of the house into winter. But every single evening, 2:17 on the dot, it came back. I started lying awake, anticipating. The knocking never changed. 3 loud, empty knocks, then silence so overwhelming that it sucked in all other noises in the cosmos. And then, finally, I discovered where it was from. The cellar corner trapdoor, burred over with rusty iron bars and nails it was, but there was something crawling under it, not by voice nor by fingers, but by presence. I knew it. An obsession, this. The potential that something may be behind this door. Something ancient, something forgotten, something hungry. In spite of better sense, I opened it. It lasted 3 days. Iron rods rusted together with rust and years. I toiled in silence, at times in darkness, candle lit by a jig from oil lamps. The deeper I descended, the colder air became, as if some sepulcher had been desecrated. When the final nail was removed, the door creaked open all by itself, slowly, slowly, and let out a hiss of so cold a breeze that it scorched my flesh. There was a stairway that went down into darkness. I couldn't see the bottom. The walls were hewn stone, damp and veined like roots. I went down, step by step, in the trembling light of my lantern. The air was heavy with the smell of something I can only really say is old. Earth, mold, and something metallic like dried blood. The stairs led up to a door. This door, unlike the rest of the house, was black wood with no grain and carried symbols on its face. Symbols that I was unfamiliar with, but which seemed to pulse as they came into being. I hesitated for only a moment before opening it. What lay beyond was impossible to describe. It wasn't a room because rooms were. It was a hollow place that imitated a room. The walls were invisible. The ceiling dissolved into an invisibility that swallowed every ember. And still, I felt its form in the vacancy of a man who had been blinded, and yet who knew his cell. The floor firm, composed of the same dark material as the walls, warming than it should have been. Between, it was a chair. That was what hit me immediately. One chair carved out of some white bone-like material, twisted and joined together like something fashioned from pain itself. And seated upon this chair was a figure. It did not stir, nor breathe. Its skin was gray and leathery, pulled taut over a form too long, too thin to be human. Its eyes were open, glinting black, and although it did not blink, I knew beyond all question that it regarded me. I couldn't turn away. My entire self cried to flee up the stairs once more and barricade the door with flame and concrete. But my body wouldn't. I stepped. I walked towards it. No voice, no sound, but I heard it, inside me, beneath my mind, like a whisper in the bones of my skull. You have seen it now. It has seen you. I took a step back, shaking, but the creature did not stir. And the room was not the same room beneath a cottage. It was a doorway, a place to pass from what I knew into something much older, much more wicked. I spun around and fled, not even having the guts to glance over my shoulder. When the trapdoor creaked shut once again, I slept no longer. The knocking returned that evening, louder this time. Louder, persistent. 3 knocks. And then, in my dreams, in my head, a voice. Not sounded, but felt. Hunger, cold, waiting. I attempted to leave. I stuffed my bag, turned on my car, but the road vanished. The wood had altered. All roads dead-ended at the cottage. Time started playing games. Nights turned into days suddenly. The clocks refused to work. My phone displayed static when I tried calling for assistance. And always under the boards, 3 knocks. I tried to burn the trap door. I poured kerosene into it, lit a match. The fire consumed the wood, but the next day there was the whole door. There was not even a trace of ash left behind. I burrowed in around the bottom, trying to make the stairs fall down. The earth bled. Black ichor issued from the earth, and the soil moaned softly in pain. And then the nightmares. I dreamed about the chair, about the person in it, and about thousands of them. Some sitting, some upright, all with eyes that did not reflect light but vacuum. I dreamed about a subterranean city, enormous and cyclopean, whose structures defied geometry, where mouths did not speak words, and time curled inward like a vortex. I was sitting in the chair. I screamed when I woke up. The cottage deteriorated. Fungus bloomed on the walls, mice emerged from the darkness, and the windows became mirrors showing not my face but the room below. The man in the chair was no longer alone. Every night I lost myself a little. My mind unraveled like string and memory was trash. I discovered notebooks I had no idea I'd written, filled with symbols that bleed when I write on them with my own hands. I heard my own voice saying words in tongues I'd never spoken, and sometimes if I looked in the mirror, the face wouldn't change with me. I was turning into something else. One morning, if one could call it that, I awoke to discover the trapdoor ajar. The stairs lay like a scar in the floor. I hadn't opened it, I hadn't gone down, and yet my feet were smudged with black dirt, and my hands were raw, scratches that I couldn't account for. The knocking stopped in the evening. There were footsteps instead, heavy, intentional. Up the stairs, I blocked the door. I boarded every window shut. I chattered gibberish in the dark like a child refusing to believe the monsters were real. The noise ceased just beneath the door. Then a whisper, "You are the next." I don't know how long I've been here. Time is a futile concept. I'm surrounded by clocks and every one of them reads differently. I'm trapped. I can't sleep without falling into that room. My body turns to dust. My mind becomes tenuous. I feel something inside me bursting forth like a seed planted years ago, now pushing its way into awareness. Soon, I swear, I will come back down. But I will not be coming back. I am writing it now as a warning, though I imagine it never will find anyone. The roads will bend, the trees will be whispering things, and the house will call someone who prefers not to be approached, someone like me. And when they discover the trapdoor, they will be struck 3 times and never again. I had always considered solitude as friend, not enemy. That all came undone in the winter of 2019. My family had departed on a year-end holiday journey to Vermont, a ritual I never quite loved. This year I decided to stay behind, claiming deadlines, work obligations, and a soft wish to break free from the constructed comfort of familial obligation. I craved quiet. I needed room. Our 2-story house perched on the outskirts of a rural Massachusetts town. It was where my parents had settled because it was isolated, quaint, isolated, and with that old-time New England charm. The land was surrounded by woods on 3 sides, thick pine trees casting long shadows to play on the snow on winter evenings. It was the kind of town that seemed to exist outside time, stuck in a hollowness that made everything sort of not quite real. The initial approach to solitude was serene. The days were spent working over manuscripts and evenings spent reading by the dim light of a fire. The only visitors of mine were the tick-tock of the old grandfather clock and the howl of the wind far down the trees. But on the 4th evening, some small thing of no importance, something that shouldn't have mattered, shattered the silence. I woke up at 2 a.m., the house dark except for the gentle brightness of the moon shining through my blinds. I wasn't violently woken up. No noise, no dream jolted me awake. Just the peculiar, intense feeling of being watched. I went back to bed, but the following morning I discovered this strange thing. A soul-dripping footprint just near the back door. 1 step. The kind of place where it is as if they came in and then vanished. I stood over it for a very long time. It was too big for my own foot and the tread was a boot pattern. Deep treads compared to the flat soles I wore. But there was no mess with it, no trail of melting snow away, no disturbance in the rug beside it. I wiped it clean and said nothing. The next night I was reading in the study when I heard the first unmistakable sound, a slow creak on the stairs as if step-by-step weight were being added. My blood turned cold. I flipped off the reading lamp and sat motionless, holding my breath. I did not breathe. Creak. Pause. Creak. I stood up holding the bat and moving quietly into the living room, ready to discover an animal or, more frightening, a burglar. But nothing was there. The stairs were vacant. The hall upstairs, which was seen from the foot of the stairs, was empty and unentered. But again, I could sense it. I could sense again that same presence, unseen yet claustrophobically close, as though it stood immediately out of reach, staring at me with eager patience. That evening, I did not sleep. I wandered from room to room, checking locks compulsively, closing curtains, switching on lights. I paced. I spoke in hushed tones to myself, giving reassurance I didn't believe I had. And through it all, the house absorbed my terror, growing quieter, heavier, more watchful. I wasn't alone. I knew that then. On the fifth morning, I discovered something much worse than a footprint. On the back door was a Polaroid photograph, grainy, old, and unsettlingly close. Me sleeping in bed, curled up away from the wall, the clock in the corner showing 03:12 a.m. I dropped it. My hands were shaking. There was no explanation I could think of that did not shatter the illusion of safety. Someone had been in the house, in my room, over me, watching. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to flee. Terror wrapped its arms around me like chains. I rationalized that the photo was a joke, a grim one by a neighbor. I tried to defend the impossible. I double-locked the doors that day anyway. I banged the windows shut. I jammed furniture in the doors and slept, holding the bat in my hand, face toward the hall. The sixth night arrived. I awoke at 3:17 a.m., and this time, I heard breathing. It was thin and wheezing, off in the corner of the room behind the wardrobe. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the wind. I turned over slowly, my heart racing in my ears. The wardrobe was shut. But there was something in the atmosphere, the presence of something unhuman. I couldn't muster up enough to open it. Rather, I pulled back into the room, descended the stairs, and out of the house. I spent the night sleeping in my car that night, parked in the driveway, looking through the windshield at the silhouette of the black house, knowing that I'd departed a battleground, not a home. Morning arrived, and shame. I entered the house on shaking legs. All of it seemed untouched. No open door, no mess. But when I ascended the stairs to my room, I noticed it. The window was open once more. Frost had spread along the sill, creating delicate filigrees of ice. Snowflakes had settled on the floor, but the worst was the note. Scrawled on the window, cut into the ice by finger or by knife point, I don't know, which was a message. Soon. I vomited. The fear was too big, too huge. I called the police. The policeman who came, Harlan, sat with me in silence, his face empty. Took notes. Asked me questions about enemies, family members, sanity. He searched the house. No break-in, no locked doors tampered with. But when I said Polaroid, his face clouded. He wanted to see it. I pulled it out of the drawer that I had jammed it into. He looked at it for a moment before he spoke. This was taken on a 600 type camera. These haven't been produced in years. That made it worse. Whoever was doing this wasn't making it up as they went along. They were careful. They had planned. He looked around the outside of the house, and that's where we found the camera under the back awning. Nicely hidden, wires stuffed behind siding. Great shot of living room and stairway. I'd been naked. My privacy, my haven, desecrated, defiled. The police took the camera away. Harlan said he'd look into it. But I saw it in his eyes. He didn't think anything would ever happen. I took a suitcase and off I went. I slept in a roadside motel, one of those chain motels with dimly lit signs and beige walls. The bed was hard, the room antiseptic, but I felt safer there than I did in my own apartment. Or at least that's what I thought, because the next morning taped to my windshield wiper was a Polaroid again. This was of the inside of the motel room, The bed I had slept in, the rumpled sheets, the lamp I had left on. There was no date, only the photo, and scribbled in pencil at the bottom, "Anywhere is now." I returned to the police. They initiated an official investigation. I was assigned a case file with my name. A patrol vehicle was sent by to make intermittent sweeps of the house. I went back once, out of necessity, to gather the remainder of my possessions. That's when I noticed what they had left behind. Under the attic insulation was a journal, leather-bound, no name on it. The handwriting was neat, compulsive. The writing was yellowed. The messages were disturbing. He bathes around 9. Bedroom light is off by 11. He reads before bed. Back window still open. Take your time. Routine offers openings. He is starting to feel it, but not enough. Not yet. He departed last night. He will come back. They always do. I'll be waiting. The final page simply stated, "One more night, then I expose him." We turned it into the police. Forensics produced no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could be traced. The case went cold within weeks, but I never cooled off. I was tormented. Even now, all these years later, I have not regained the stillness I once enjoyed. Each groan of floorboard, each flash of light, each crawling shadow suggests that winter, because someone intruded into my world, my rooms, my mind, and observed, not to steal, not to hurt, but to live alongside me, unseen, until it was convenient to be noticed. That's what frightens me most, not the likelihood of harm, but the realization that someone can insert themselves into your life and you will never even notice they were there, until they decide you should. It began in silence. Not the kind that swaddles itself about quiet rooms, but the kind of silence that hums just beneath the threshold of things, like the drone of an untuned television. It was midwinter and a Wednesday night, and the city had been hiding behind an apron of sleet and factory fog for hours. I'd been working late, with occasional exception. But this week, our systems had crashed due to a data migration issue, and as being the junior compliance officer, it was a great opportunity for me to be in control. So I worked late. The rest had dissolved by 7, wincing at me in passing, bloodshot eyes, briefcases dangling. At 8, I was alone. The office building itself was one of those remodeled corporate buildings, glass fronts and shiny marble lobbies, gentle mood lighting, gentle whispering elevators rather than clanging ones. But once it got dark, the beauty was a lot winterier. The motion sensors would flash into being as I walked down empty hallways, and then fade out of being the moment I'd walk beyond their reach. There was a quiet, an abnormally quiet air, as though the building had drawn too deep of a breath. Our 4th floor was perpetually cold. I would always assume it was due to some flaw in design or malfunctioning air ducts. But tonight, the cold was intentional, as though the walls had drawn in, as though the building had exhaled something from the past. I returned to my cubicle and continued sorting through infected files and corrupted logs. My screen flickered feebly, lighting only the edges of the monitor. Sometimes the lights would falter just a little, then recover. At 9:23 p.m., something shifted. I am not capable of defining the shift exactly. It was not a noise nor an optical effect. It was a presence, a weight in the air, a heaviness, a watching. The 4th floor was strange in design. Our department occupied its own wing, separated from the rest by frosted glass and automatic sliding doors. Facing us were a series of meeting rooms no one used anymore. They were left unsecured, dark, empty, some having projectors still bolted to ceilings, cords curled up like slumbering snakes. One room, however, was different. Room 417 was different. I had steered clear of it previously without understanding why. It contained a mirror on the opposite side of the room, unlike the others. A floor-to-ceiling panel set into the concrete, its edges sealed with black industrial caulk. It formed a slight curvature, warping your reflection just far enough to perceive. At 9:48 p.m., the ambient light outside my cubicle flashed once more, and this time it never came back. The rest of the floor was still lit, but that where I was sitting was dark. I stood there bewildered. When I shifted my body, the sensors did not compensate. I moved my hand around. Nothing. The emergency lights flickered on, a golden red glow surrounding the walls like spilled wine. I heard my pulse in my ears. My screen still glowed, an otherworldly contrast. And then abruptly, the monitor went black. Complete darkness now. I didn't budge. My ears perked up. The air conditioner had ceased. Even the distant hum of the city seemed muffled. I put out my hand. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no messages. It was as if I had stepped into a time pocket where the world outside no longer existed. I moved towards the repair control panel along the fixed corridor through vacant conference rooms. Along the hallway as I proceeded, the ceiling lights remained dark. But in the rooms, the emergency lights flickered one by one, like not answering me, but something moving ahead of me. When I opened the door to room 417, its door was slightly open. The red light spilled out of it like a gash. I delayed, staggered, then went inside. The mirror was still there, but it was no longer showing me. Instead of my own image, the surface showed the hallway behind me. Only, there stood someone in it. The reflection in the mirror loomed over me, standing much taller than I. Its head was tilted to one side, wearing what appeared to be an antique business suit. No eyes were visible, only blackness where there would have been eyes. I whirled around. Nothing. The hall was empty. I faced the mirror again. He hadn't moved. But this time, he was nearer. The mirror self had emerged. The ghost was now standing precisely behind where I would be, inches ahead of where my shoulder should be in the reflection. But still nothing behind me existed in life except the empty, shapeless hallway. I moved back, never once taking my eyes from the glass. The door creaked and closed itself with a metallic hiss. The flash of the emergency light was once, barely visible, before it returned. There were two men in the mirror now. There was the tall man, and the other, a bit shorter and abnormally shaped, crouched low, learning to stand. I wasn't breathing. My body was rigid as stone. My instincts screamed at me to run, shatter the mirror, scream, anything. But I could do nothing but look. The second of them began to move in the mirror, not down the hallway behind me, but directly ahead towards the glass. Crawling, clawing, jerky motion as if it fought against some unseen impediment. Then stopped. Its head pressed against the face, and I realized it wasn't glass. It was a window. I was able to step back, colliding with the door, grasping for the handle. When the door opened, I did not even take an instant to look over my shoulder. I took off. My feet pounded irrationally along the corridor. I cut across corners without any thought, flying through my cubicle, making a beeline for the elevator. When I pressed the call button, nothing. I pressed it again. Dead. The display at the top of the door flashed, and for a moment, the screen read, B4, Basement 4. There was no Basement 4. There were only parking and archives in the two underground levels. I turned and ran to the stairwell. The door pushed back against me. Inside, the stairwell was dark and shadowy. I descended slowly, phone flashlight trembling in my hand. Every door I passed had a brass plate, 4, 3, 2, 1, then B1, B2, B3, B4. B4's door was open just a little, just enough. Behind it, darkness. But I caught something. Not footsteps, not voices. Something I never heard before, a kind of breathing, but not lungs. Wet, wheezing, soggy. As if something had lived there, but shouldn't have. I slammed the stairway door shut and sprinted up again. I made it back to my floor and something was off. The entire fourth floor was on. The entire thing. All the lights were at maximum brightness, so the entire wing glowed like the hallway of a hospital. My cubicle wasn't there. Not empty. Not there. taken over by smooth, uninterrupted flooring. Desks on either side had vanished. That area of the building might not have existed. And again I heard it. That gasping, raspy breath. It came from room 417. Later, I must have passed out. I do not know how I had ended up on the floor of my cubicle, but I woke up there in the morning, bathed in sunlight. People were filtering in, talking about traffic and weather. I looked around. Everything was fine. I asked the janitor if there had been a blackout the night before. He said no. I looked at my phone. No calls, no messages, no sign anything had occurred. For weeks, I explained it away. Insomnia, stress hallucination. I almost got away with it. Until it happened again. 3 weeks after, I stayed late again. This time on purpose, almost out of compulsion, as if irresistibly attracted. I needed to disprove the recollection, to challenge it and see it dissipate under the power of reason. Again, the same course. The lights, the quiet, the mirror, the corpses. But this time I did not run. I entered room 417. The door closed behind me, as always. The mirror was present, but my reflection returned. Only it wasn't me. It was me. As I would look in 5 years. Thinner, pale, eyes sunk in, with a strange badge. My reflection raised its hand to the glass. I stood there, transfixed, as it pressed its palm against the mirror. Then smiled. A wicked, cruel smile. That was when I knew. This building did not operate according to the normal laws of space and time. The fourth floor, room 417 specifically, was a rift in the fabric of our world. I decided to investigate this, in secret, out of sight. There were no blueprints for the fourth floor as it existed then. I interviewed a retired janitor, whom I found in company records, and he spoke something ominous. The floor was closed down for years prior to the renovation, following the accident. What accident? I pressed. He shook his head, grumbled something about echoes that wear faces, and hung up. I searched through internet archives, public records, even obituaries. I heard about a man, Thomas Rain, a mid-manager who died in 1996. Officially, he had died of heart failure at the office, but the autopsy report was sealed. His body was discovered alone in what used to be room 417. They indicated that he was found sitting in a chair with a smile, eyes wide open. The mirror did not yet exist, but his face, according to police reports, was found drawn on the wall in blood, complete with a smiling face. He had scribbled a message on the conference table with a paperclip. I saw myself leave, but I stayed. I no longer work there. I had left 3 days after the last one. But that is not important, because the mirror still exists. It appears where it shouldn't. Glaring in train windows, rear-view mirrors, even puddles. Always pale, always at the edge. Sometimes I see the tall man again. Sometimes I look at my older self, closer now. His smile wider. I cover my house with cloth. No mirrors. But still, the dreams exist. Dreams about floors that never exist. Breathing buildings. Stairways that ascend to the beyond. And always, always, room 417, waiting. I write this not as a warning, nor as a confession, but as a recording. Because someday, you might work late. You might take the elevator past your floor. You might catch a glimpse of yourself, watching you. And when that happens, do not enter the mirror. Not everyone comes back. Not everyone gets to stay. It was the type of night that breathed standing there holding its breath, cold, damp, and shrouded in quiet, save for the beat of rain against pavement. The sky had exhausted itself into a gray nothing that smothered the world in gagging horror of gray. The streets threw back wet gleams of dull, shivering lights, and the wind crept like a muffled whisper too soft to catch. I am Thomas Vell, and although over a decade has now gone by since that night, I can talk of it without a thrill running down my spine. A thrill not of chill, but of memory, which is branded indelibly into my own being. I was 29 years old, a literature professor in a small university in the heart of a gloomy forested town in North Yorkshire. That word had been particularly cruel. The faculty building was being renovated, and my evening classes had been pushed late into the night. It wasn't a minute before 10 o'clock before I finally left university property, carrying a drenched umbrella that did little to keep the rain at bay overhead. The rain had penetrated my jacket years ago, and my leather boots squelched with each stride. I walked along a cramped, winding path that carved its way through Greystone Park, a route I'd walked hundreds of times. The road was lined with leaning elms, their spindly branches stretching up like bent fingers. Streetlights illuminated the way at irregular intervals, their yellow glow dissipated in fog and mist. I continued on, and something in the atmosphere felt different. I remember pausing halfway along the path, overpowered by an unexplained stillness. No crickets, no leaves, no distant rumble of traffic. Just the rain, and under that, silence so profound it echoed in my mind. And then I saw him. A man, standing rigid under the glow of a lamppost 30 feet away. He was facing away from me, and his shadow was elongated by the skewed angle of the light. In a black coat-length coat, hat flung over his head, he was motionless, spookily motionless, unshaken by the storm. I hit the brakes, unsure why I gasped with my throat tightening. There was nothing to fear, because it did happen for people to be in the park during the daytime, let alone nighttime. There was some fundamental intuition within me trembled, an ancient push of memory that alerted me to the fact that I was seeing something normal. I tried to think, to ease the tightness in my chest. Perhaps he was waiting for someone. Perhaps he had simply paused to light a cigarette or seek shelter. But he did not move, not even a twitch. As I approached closer, the hairs on my arms bristled and I felt each raindrop hit my head. I moved closer. He did not move. 20 feet. 10 feet. And then, as if provoked by my presence, he began to spin, slowly, deliberately, his head tilted, presenting a face I cannot define in terms of human appearance. Not that it was ugly in form, but simply hollow. No eyes, nose, mouth, no features. Smooth, wet flesh curving where the face should have been, like melted wax and unblemished. And yet I knew irrevocably that he was looking at me. I did not scream. I was not allowed to. My body convulsed into a paralysis that appeared to hold time itself within its grasp. My eyes tunnel-visioned. All else fell into that awful face in the shivering radiance of the lamp. A blast of wind surged up, with an unnatural guttural vibration, low, near silent, but there, like the benediction under the breath of a dying god. He gestured with one hand, not to wave, but to point, at me. And then I was running. The rest of the way was a blur of shadows and jumping lights. Trees clustered as if they were shrinking away from some hidden energy. I do not know how I made it across the other side of the park, or how I arrived home. What I do know, obviously, is that the rain never ceased. Even after I locked the door of my hut, bolted everything, and collapsed onto the floor with a sense of weariness, the rain itself seemed to be echoing off walls, and the dreams began. They weren't quite nightmares in the normal definition of the word, but skewed representations of reality. In all of them, I was still waiting under the glow of that lamppost, with him waiting for me. He would sometimes speak without lips, the voice piercing my head like needles with ink in them. He would sometimes be there, and I would awaken to the scent of rain in my room and marks on the floorboards with mud. I told myself I was mad, suffering some kind of mental collapse under pressure or sickness, until I saw him again, not in a dream, but standing outside my window. It was 7 days later, on a similar tempest-torn night, that I saw him again. The storm had returned with howling violence, battering the roof with thunderous blows, as if the very heavens were rending. I'd been sleeping in the armchair beside the fire, over half besotted on a bottle of scotch I had no intention of leaving behind, when I was abruptly awoken by a faint but unmistakable sense, the sound of someone behind glass. The room was dark, lighted only by the smoldering coals and the rare flick of lightning that hashed the world into spastic bits. My eyelids slowly pulled back, weighed with terror, and of their own accord my eyes wandered to the top window over the bookcase. He stood, out in the garden, there unmoving again, his figure laid out in cutting line by a jagged zigzag of lightning. There was no doubt. The same looming figure, the same greatcoat and hat. And despite not being able to see clearly up at his face, I could feel the glint of his eyes boring into me like ice under skin. The glass fogged very slightly, not from the warmth inside, but from something colder looming inches off on the other side. I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt as though I was having some kind of wild, bad dream, and if I took him in too easily, if I pretended that he existed, he would walk in through the door. That he waited for me to realize he existed. My realization. The lightning ceased, the blackness receded, and he disappeared. The next day I walked through the garden. Prints, bare human feet deep, impressed in the flooded ground just behind the flower bed. They did not go anywhere. No entrance, no exit. Just a pair of feet planted, as if he had come out of the ground. I did not report him to the police. Why would I? What would I say to them? That there had begun appearing in my real life a nightmare faceless man? That he knew where I lived, what I feared, what I fantasized about? Even I wasn't entirely certain that I was believing what I was seeing. I doubted my own sanity. I read books on psychology. I met with a former colleague, Dr. Ambrose, a quiet man who had dealt with post-traumatic delusions in the past. I attempted to explain to him what I could, omitting the stranger's impossible face, or else I'd end up being locked away. He explained to me that I probably had a chronic hallucination of unresolved trauma, a not unfamiliar but very rare condition. He calmed me down, got me out of work, and wrote me something that I never took. Somewhere deep within, I knew that this was something I did not imagine. He was real, and I had seen him. Not just that, I had let him into my head, and that visit, I realized, I could not take back. The visits grew more frequent, never openly intrusive, always lurking on the periphery of awareness, a shadow in a corner of a street, a blur in a corridor mirror. One day, while showering, I spotted the shadow of a brimmed hat across the door from the other side of the shower curtain, despite the fact that the door was bolted. He was a presence in my life, the man under the lamplight, as I began calling him. A shadow, a plague, an infestation that had fastened itself to my brain. My nights became a constant state of fear. I ran out of electricity, living instead by candlelight, praying that light would keep away the darkness, which seemed to stir him. I stopped going outside the cottage. Food spoiled. The phone cord went dead. I stopped counting days. The final fall began on the 11th night. I awoke in darkness, but of the kind you can't find every day. This was monochromatic, a silence so absolute it felt oppressive. The fire had died, the windows were splashed with rain, and not a distant sound broke the silence. And then something awful happened to me. I could hear my own heartbeat, not in my chest, but on the other side of the room. Thump, 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 metric, unwavering, as if someone or something was mocking the rhythm of life behind the curtains. I got up slowly, not even daring to breathe. My eyes gradually adapted, and in the back corner, lit only when lightning shattered the sky, I could see him, not outside anymore, not watching, inside, waiting in the corner. And he was not still this time. His arms jerked scarcely as a puppet at the instant when the strings were going to be pulled tight. The flesh of his face began to wrinkle, not from emotion, but as though something beneath was yanking upwards, tail-ending to escape. I stepped back. My heel hit the baseboard. Crack. The sound seemed to resound oddly. He spun around. The brim of his hat topped, and I looked under the skin for the first time, a quiver of movement. Not flesh, not a face, but numerous, countless little things fighting in the space where features should be, as if centipedes in a silk purse. I ran, fled out the back door and into the storm. The ground was a bog. My feet sank deeply into the bog as I ran back through the woods at the back of my property. Branches slapping my face, wind wailing like a grieving woman. Behind me, I heard footsteps, not footsteps created by men. Too hard, too sharp, like claws or hooves on stone, though the ground was damp. Faster than mine, closer. I couldn't stand to see. I came along the road and stumbled into the path of a car that was coming. Screaming brakes, flashing lights. I hit the ground. I came to in a hospital. The hospital was clean, quiet, and weighted with pale fluorescent light. I was told by the hospital doctor that I had acute fatigue, dehydration, and mild concussion. The driver of the postal van, a male, had found me on the side of the road near the Greystone Woods unconscious. Nobody had ever seen the guy I'd escaped from. Nobody had found any trace of claw marks, footprints, or anything else. Just me, alone, delirious and muddy, talking away about something no one could possibly have made out. They kept me for 3 days. They gave me water, sedated me, and ran psych tests. I explained the most plausible thing I could, omitting the faceless man and the heartbeat in the dark. The doctors considered it a psychotic break, but I was coherent enough to dissuade them. I was released on the 4th morning. The rain finally stopped, leaving a wispy gray sky. I didn't return home. I sold the cottage the month that followed, sight unseen with all the contents. I took all of my books, furnishings, clothing, with nothing at all. I wouldn't risk carrying anything from the place along. I feared, or reasoned instead, that he'd left himself on the location somehow, or even, so it seems to me, upon my memory as well. I relocated south to the seashore, changed my telephone number, cut off contact with the university, and abandoned all accumulated contacts. I purchased a simple seashore flat and wrote alone. Alone, quiet days interrupted by sea wind and far-off gulls. It succeeded, at least for a period. The visions ceased. The dreams vanished. I began to hope, think, perhaps that it had all been a slow spiral into insanity, cured by distance and time, until last night. 10 years had passed, 10 years of silence. I had not walked in any park at dusk. I had not touched one umbrella. I had avoided all photos, black passageway mirrors, and worst of all, street lamps on rainy nights. But the storm returned last night, and him too. I was brewing tea at the kitchen sink. Rain materialized out of nowhere, hammering the roof with that very same cold beat I hadn't heard in years. Something in me snapped into place, like something years stranded got flipped up and left running. I stepped over to the kitchen window, and there he was, under the single flickering street lamp just beyond the hedge. The only one alone, hat, coat, standing there, waiting, not looking, not moving, waiting. But it was the light that defeated me, because it flashed once, twice, then darkness, once. When the lamplight went out, all power in the house was out. I moved back into the shadows, all nerves in me screaming, but too late. There was a wet sound, a slithering drag of some heavy object on tile, not from the window, but inside the house, from the hall. He had come inside, not through door nor wall nor window. He had arrived by memory, by thought, by fear. You see, the man in the light of the lamp is not a man. He is an echo, a specter of fear itself, living on the raw horror that dwells within us all. He has no door. He has only remembrance. He is where fear lingers, where a shadow falls just beyond the mind's reach. He has no face, because he wears ours. And tonight, writing this by candlelight and clasped hands, I know he is near. The candle flickers, the air charges, and from the room outside, I hear it again. Thump, thump, thump. A heartbeat, not mine. I'd always been a scientific skeptic, a man of reason and logic who avoided anything that science and human ingenuity couldn't define and explain. But even the most logical mind has its breaking point, and I've discovered that there are things so mysterious, so inexplicable that they leave an indelible mark on your soul that they can never erase. It is a story of just such a moment. It's one of those things which have been gnawing away at me for years now, but I carry the guilt with every night's sleep. It started at the start of my second year of university. As was true with all the rest of the students, I was looking for a leased home, a one-room apartment where I could be quiet that I so desperately needed, so I could concentrate all my energy towards reading. Finally, after all those weeks of searching, I saw what appeared to me as the ideal bargain. A tiny two-bedroom apartment a couple of blocks from school. The rent was fair, the accommodation sufficient, and the landlord a certain shining exemplar of integrity, a right good fellow. I even shared with a flatmate, a fellow by the name of Ethan. Ethan was a shy, introverted sort of fellow, a year older than myself and in his third year at university. He was this laid-back sort of guy, smiley-face sort of face, and the sort of guy that you would instantly become buddies with. We hung out, sort out our own bedroom, and halved the 50% of the rent between us two. Everything was okay at first. The initial 2 weeks came by without any problems. More of Ethan's wasted hours sitting slumped over in his room for hours at a time were spent reading or tinkering with this experiment or that. I myself did most of mine away from home, studying and making friends. We scarcely ever had a minute to ourselves, but then again when we did, things were improved. There was nothing whatever out of the ordinary about our home setup, and yet there was something wrong. Quiet enough at first, perhaps, but gone forever the moment I'd looked. I found it in the evening after getting back from school for the day. I opened the front door of the apartment and strange, heavy quiet was the welcome that greeted me. Ethan's room was closed, but not the silence that made my skin prickle. It was the smell. At first it smelled bad, but the closer I went toward the apartment, the worse it smelled. A horrid, gag-inducingly rotten smell that reminded me of rot. I was standing in the hesitation, attempting to pinpoint where the stench was. The stench was in Ethan's room. I wasn't sure whether I should knock or not. Maybe it was only his dirty laundry, something of no concern. And then suddenly it struck me. I knocked softly at his door. It did not open. "Ethan?" I whispered. No response came. Something was not right, and my stomach was knotting up in queasiness. My head was yelling to me to turn around and leave. Do not push, but my legs refused to listen. I had a hold of the handle, and the door swung open with a shrieking creak. The room was dark, the only light the faint one of a desk lamp. Ethan slouched forward, his back to me, over his desk. He was tense, rigid as if chiseled so. The floor was thick with rot that I could recognize. I retched sick even to consider it, my senses let loose in the encounter. "Ethan," I said uncertainly across the room. There was nothing. His body was not shuddering, not shaking, as if he didn't hear me whispering even a single word. I took another step, with a pounding heart in my chest. As I was by his desk, I could see the object on his desk. A book. A yellowed, worn book. Leaf paper pages, but not the book that made me ill. The writing, nonsense, nigh illegible scribbles which had been scrawled in wild man haste across the pages. No sense, but with sharp, acrid edges. Scribbles that you'd pass on to someone holding the frayed lace of sanity. But most of all that angered me was his face. His eyes were tense and wide, gazing at something that I wasn't. His mouth was forming words, yet there was nothing issuing from them. It was taut, unnatural for an expression that I had to struggle not to be able to turn and run from. "Ethan, what's wrong with you?" I demanded, strained voice. He did not stir. His gaze was on the book, his shaking hands resting lightly in case they were on the pages. I was frightened. I crept towards him slowly and shook him firmly on the shoulder. "Wake up, Ethan," I cried, and then finally his eyes faltered, and for an instant he returned. His gaze swept over mine, and for an instant a flash of recognition crossed his face. And then it was gone. What did I do?" he grated, trying to speak. I withdrew my hand and moved away from him. "Do you feel all right?" I asked, trying to take his pulse. You were doing something strange." Ethan stared at me for a second with a blank expression, and then he just simply stood up from the chair and slammed the book shut with a crack bang. He turned and began to push me out of the way, rushing towards the door. I was frozen, immovable, under the thick air of his room as if stuck by a massive weight. It was awful the next few days. Ethan was still pushing me away, not speaking for hours. I was waking up at night from odd sounds, nail-scraffling sounds, fingernails on the wall. I even heard muffled conversation once in his room, but whenever I go in to knock on the door and let him know I was concerned if he was okay, he'd just tell me he's fine. The worst. His appearance astonished me. He started losing his energy. His eyes were sunken and hollow. His freshly ironed clothes were now rumpled. His clothes were perpetually smeared and had an odor of stinking eggs, as if he had not bathed for a long time. But it was not the appearance of him that annoyed me. It was his attitude. He'd be muttering under his breath, cursing at whatever I was never quite able to utter. And every now and then, as I passed by his door, I'd see him standing there clenching his teeth in the narrow strip of doorway, eyes granite hard and cold. Alien. As if the Ethan I knew no longer existed and some other beast had replaced it. I attempted to call to him, to speak with him about anything, but he would shun me, getting further and further into himself. The apartment which I came to love, the cozy, warm apartment, was suffocating me. I was pacing at night in the streets, sleeping in friends' apartments, libraries, wherever I would not have to be in a room with the restrictive energy that filled all the rooms. I hadn't even realized it had occurred until 7 days later. I rolled in late that evening, tired from a string of lessons. I arrived at the door, saw it was open a little bit. I stalled. Always closed, always locked. My heart pounding, the worst-case situations running through my head. I slipped in stealthily, my foot muffled by thick carpet. Ethan's room was empty, bed made, but something on the ground. A photograph. I got down on my knees to retrieve it, shivering. The photo was of Ethan and me from a few months back, but it wasn't the photo that made me shiver. It was the note on the back. "They are always watching. They want him. I can't escape." I uploaded the photograph, my own breath caught in my throat. I shuddered head to foot with chill, and my mind spun at the terrible possibilities. Who was responsible? And what did Ethan mean by, "they want him"? It continued the next day when I visited the landlord's residence to ask if he knew him and if he had any idea where Ethan was. He informed me that Ethan was not a registered tenant. He did not even have any evidence of him signing the lease. My heart skipped a beat. What was that? Did I have an impersonator the entire time? Weeks went by before the police were able to put the pieces together about what had transpired. Ethan, all he was now, had leased this building in his alias. He was no one, no family, no past. This book that was present waiting for him to read had bloody letters and symbols. Anything out of the norm for being something of a particular culture or something out of a particular language. They never were able to catch up with Ethan, but the apartment, what was left of it, was closed down and condemned. I left a few days later, abandoning the walls which had been home to me. I had attempted to leave Ethan there as well, but could not. The maddening feeling that something nameless trailed me waiting would not stop. I never did discover what became of him. But even in the shadows, I can still hear the scuttling sounds of rustling all around on the walls. And I even find myself thinking, I see that cold, unblinking eye staring back at me in the room's darkness. And when I do sleep, I wake up and my mind is racing with this question. Was he ever really my roommate or whatever? I was always the outdoor person. A love of nature and a never-ending desire for solitude and peace always had me ensconced in the most remote of places on the planet. But something wicked and nasty is in the forest that even the old hands on the camp trail can't understand until something terrible happens to them. It was there where it happened during one of these expeditions when I had more respect for risks that were the meat in wilderness. It started innocently enough, all horrors. A weekend getaway into the city, away from the constant whine of technology and down into the belly of a forest that long understood it. Somewhere warm, where trees spoke language the wind could do on its own. The road was familiar, the terrain was familiar, and the silence inspiring. I stretched along the bank of a very small, very old lake, in which the sky was reflected as on a piece of glassy water. There was a hint of pine in the air, and there was seldom so much as the soft rustle of leaves when the last coal of the day expired below the line of the horizon. There were all the signs that this was a calm haven. I pitched quietly. At sundown, I settled at the fire and sat beside the fire with it, watching as it hissed to soothe me to a peaceful place. It was a while that I'd come this deep into the woods, and loneliness was what I craved. No break, no calls, no texts, just me and the universe. The night itself, however, slid onto a much darker page than I had anticipated. As the stars began to climb up into the blackness of the night sky, I had the sense that I began to miss a phantom hollowness of empty space behind me. The forest was not as alive as the forest had been alive in my last experience. So different. Something was in a hold, waiting. I pushed the idea aside, attributing it to nights of quietness and imaginations of my own mind unchecked. But unease remained. I withdrew into my tent. There, in night descending, I heard what for a moment had the sound of wind, a funereal humming. It was not usual whisper of leaves nor remote hooting of owl. It was more full, louder, and it seemed to hum through the very ground I was standing on. I moved stiff, holding my breath, hunching over to listen, but the noise was gone as soon as it had come. My wandering mind jumped into its own aberrations, trying to comfort me that it was merely the wild animal playing tricks on me. And then the tracks. They were distant, silent, dishonest, as if someone floated by on something other than clothing as he went by. Or perhaps it was an animal, a deer, but with that humanness to it there in the way steps were being taken out, paced, measured, with intent. I was stuck in position where I was, all muscle tensed, my heart racing more wildly. The noise was getting nearer in sound. I comforted myself it was a person walking by, perhaps a lost backpacker in the evening who had wandered off trails, though I knew intellectually no man ever walked this part of woods. But I need to get out, need to know what or whom it was. I ripped open my tent flap, looking into the darkness beyond me. Nothing. I moved stealthy, the cold nipping at bare flesh, the ground beneath trampled down by weight of hidden footsteps. The hair rose at the base of the neck, taste of being observed creeping up the vertebrae. I gazed out over the camp, from the blinding visage of the lake to the less immediate trees of the forest edges, and all was well, all that is which reason could verify. The humming came back, crushing and relentless, as if the world itself were reaching out to me, trying to communicate some message. I retreated to my tent, my mind reeling, my body loaded with a nervous tension that I couldn't dissipate. I couldn't sleep, so I lay awake in my bed listening to the night, hearing the forest, and hearing the increasing louder and clearer sound in my head. It was a beat, a rhythm, the real heartbeat of the earth itself, and with it came a feeling of foreboding doom that thudded my mind. With stages of light filtering through behind trees in the forest, morning crept upon me and I did not sleep. The forest descended back into its stuttering hush once the buzz dropped into bird songs and leaf susurrus. Nausea continued to reside in far corners of my head. I could not see why, but I felt sure I was not alone. It was not until the following day, when I penetrated deeper into the wood, that I realized fully the malevolence that had transpired. The road which I had marched so bravely hitherto now appeared unreal, foreign, as if the ground itself had been reshaped under cover of night. The trees, the gnarled and titanic trees, were their silent guardians, their deformed branches throwing distorted shadows which curled on the periphery of my vision. And then, when I was considering that perhaps I was going crazy, I saw Small clearing out of view, a circle of stones carefully arranged in an orderly manner in the middle. One would think of a campfire, but the stones were not arranged in this orderly manner in the wild. They had been arranged with purpose, and each stone had a spot it needed to go to, as if the fingers that set it there had thought of something else besides a campfire. I knelt alongside it, my hand tracing the chill of stones. A shiver of fear leaped over me like a girdle about my bosom. I looked in at the ring's eye and felt the icy, keen stab cut into me. It glared for a moment, as if a weight had trodden upon the brim of my mind, and that was when I saw it. A presence at the edge of the clearing, barely discernible as if blended in with the trees somehow. But I did see it, or at least can persuade myself I did. A distorted, unnatural form, wearing blackness, with eyes that I could not see but somehow feel. My lungs were seared, my heart racing, and by the time I could get one step closer to her, the woman vanished. Vanished as if she never did exist on the scene to start with. I was there, frozen, attempting to talk myself out of it, that it was all in my mind. Loneliness eventually got the better of me, but the sense of being watched would not dissuade. My entire life screamed in truth that I was not alone. As I drove back out of the clearing, the enigmatic footsteps echoed again, now beyond question close, as if tracking me. I picked up speed back to camp, my head swirled with what-ifs, none of them reassuring. A hunter? An animal? Something worse? Something old? Something woven into the very fabric of the woods themselves? The queer humming sounded back that night more boisterously, and it was accompanied by a second sound, whispery, hardly audible at first but swelling. A groan, a deep one, and a wail, weaving in and out of the trees. The voice was not beast's nor man's, but very, very old, long, long ago. It crept into my brain like poison, clouding my head and eliminating any possibility of dreaming anything other than reality. The fire crackled at my shoulder, its hot warmth nothing to bring comfort. I felt like something was altering out there, observing me, waiting for me to become mired under the guise of the light. Later during the night, I awoke in terror, realizing the footsteps, rumbling and whispering, gave way to humming rhythm in the background. I was no longer by myself in this wood, and whatever was living in between was not leaving me behind. My dream was to have a home, a house where I would be secure and can honestly claim it as mine. Purchasing a new home was to be the start of a fresh life. I craved quiet and tranquility, and the power which comes with being a homeowner. But what I discovered when I moved into that so-called ideal house was not peace, but a toxic presence that polluted my knowledge of the real thing, replacing all fantasy of security and control. The house itself was as I had imagined, an unremarkable two-story home on a quiet suburban residential street. It was the sort of street with blink-eyed windows that camered newly mown lawns and overarching trees, a calm place. And the moment I entered, there was the acrid smell of new paint and newly varnished surfaces lingering still. It was all that I had dreamed, new, untouchable, and alive with possibilities. Those first few days were spent fiddling about with furniture, sorting out my life, enjoying the goodness of everything. It was a home that had been sanctuary, cover, and haven from the uncertainties of life. Even that in terms of not days as dwelling before peace had been broken. It started gradually to start off, spells of the wood that I had confused with the house settling, but then came the after-dark strange noises, soft whispers, the hum of distant individuals just beyond hearing. I dismissed the thought of homespun, even considering that it must be the wind, or perhaps the settling of the foundations of the older structures. It has to be. Buildings settle, don't they? But part of me placed that theory on a back burner. Something inside of me knew that I was being observed. That first evening I did indeed sense it. The presence was the evening that I first made up my mind to sleep in the master bedroom on the second floor. The bedroom was the correct size, with large windows which opened out over the street below. The bed placed centrally in the room was so large for one person to get into. Lying in bed and attempting to calm my mind, I couldn't help but feel like I was under surveillance. It was like there were eyes on me, but hidden, only felt. My heart beat painfully against the inner workings of my ribcage as I froze like a statue, attempting to hear noise that would be the cause of the feeling. The house was quiet. Too quiet. And yet there was something menacing just below the surface, something that grew heavier by the second. I shut my eyes, but the sensation didn't lessen. It was as if the room itself was some sort of tightening trap, closing in on me, tightening like a rope until it hurt to breathe. I told myself it was nerves. It had been such a huge change after all. A new country, a new home. Of course, I would expect to be nervous, but if I closed my eyes, I felt someone looking at me, the feeling radiating, expanding. I returned to the house the next day in a bid to get used to every nook and cranny, a bid to claim back the home. The house, beautiful as it was too large and unusual. I would stride up and down through the passages, making a list of the infinitesimal faults, the light attempting to penetrate in the passage beyond the kitchen, or the fact that the attic door had this wistful draft, even on sunny days. They were all various, but none ever quite felt home. The stranger in someone else's house to make my own never did ever feel like it belonged, like an invisible line which I could not cross. And then the first of the inexplicable things happened. It was late evening and I was alone in the house getting supper ready. I had just set out the plates when I heard unmistakable creaking footsteps upstairs on the floor. They were gigantic leaps, one towards the other. I was banging against my heart and I didn't get up. I hadn't been in that room, there wasn't anybody home but me. I just took stock, holding my breath, waiting for the fuss to be past, but it just grew and grew louder, as though whoever was approaching directly to me. I ran towards the stairs, yelling blindly, "Hello?" My yell was eaten by the house walls. All there was to hear was the empty, echoing sound of the hall upstairs. The footsteps just as quickly went away as if I had just been standing there all along, nothing ever happening. I chilled with hairs on the back of my neck raised when I stood in the door to the hall, too frightened to go in. I locked every door and window that night, trying to drown the nagging fear that had made a home on my chest. I did not sleep. All the shadows on the borders of my bedroom would feel there was something, all the noises in our house a whisper, as if somebody had whispered something. The experiences of the next few days were becoming increasingly and increasingly intense. It was no longer the noises now, the footfalls, the whispers, but there were marks of an unusual sort being found on the walls. Small, initially instants, I kept assuring myself it was just the strain of my moving. Perhaps it was piling furniture up against walls or dust in unusual forms. But the marks were deliberate ones. They were not mistakes. Others were lines, circles, spirals that wrapped around walls. I tried to scrub them away, but the more I scrubbed, the stronger the marks became the following day. They lingered there intentionally, as if the house itself were on a mission of trying to talk to me, trying to tell me something that I couldn't hear. I drifted away from reality. And then there was the one night that I still recall to this day, when I had a guest who ravaged the last vestiges of security which I ever possessed in the house. I had been sleeping late in bed, viewing a late movie, and then had retired to bed again after that. I had not even switched off when I awoke to listen to that tremendous thud downstairs, a one so careless that it shook the entire house. Then came the clear tinkle of shattered glass, the heart-stopping crunching noise of something on the ground. My heart missed a beat as I hurried down, my terror getting the best of me, to discover all to be fine. Glass in living room window not broken, furniture not disarranged. But there was a mood, a chill, a heaviness, an emptiness that clung to me like wet mist. Standing in the living room, acclimating to what had happened, I realized something that made my back tingle. In the hall, I saw a figure behind the living room mirror window. I turned around, but the hall was empty. I was alone, but I did not doubt it. I ran around the house, turning on every light, my brain trying to think up an explanation that never occurred to me. The ghost, never quite seen, floated just outside my field of vision, a shadow only, as if trying to hide from me. The remaining days were a blur of terror, nightmare and reality blended. The house was my prison, and I was an unwilling prisoner. The harder I fought to escape the fear, the tighter it held me. It was not that the house was haunted, it was I. I finally hired a group of ghost hunters, hoping somehow that they would find for me some rational reason. But they found nothing. No spirits, no ghosts, anything out of the ordinary. And yet, still, the house remained. It was a part of me now, one that enveloped itself around all my movement, all my thought. I could not move anywhere without it. And look at me now. I am sitting here remembering my experience, and I can honestly say, the house did something greater than alter my understanding of reality. The house altered me. I am not the same individual who went into that house. The loneliness, the terror, the sense of being watched every second, it annihilated something within me. I departed home soon after, but all these years since I can still sense it there. I've got it seeping into my nighttime blackness, and occasionally, in the stillness of my own existence, still hear them approaching, sense the weight of their empty eyes. The house is lost to me, but never will it be lost to me. With every passing tick of the clock since I'd come home last, I went on reassuring myself the worst was past. The queasy feeling of discomposure which stuck with me all these months seemed no longer to fill my head with harebrained schemes. But deep within me I felt something was not the same. Something irrevocable had unraveled inside me. I changed address, bought a new flat away from reminders of there. I took it farther than that and rationalized the house, the whispering, the darkness within, everything, the whole nine, was stress, my brain fooling me. I had the house to myself, loneliness grip on me, and from this place of vulnerability, I allowed my fear to give something more to itself. But nestled in my head was a tiny voice that cried. It wasn't years and years ago from then that I learned the truth. It had been ages past that I was out of the house, and I had never said anything about it, not to my family, not to my friends. It was a page that I had turned over, so it seemed, but the memories of the page were still haunting my subconscious. I ripped open one day a letter in the mailbox, a stiff white envelope with my name typed on it. The address was in some strange hand, the folded corners of the paper worn thin from having been pushed through so many. I did not know what it was, and I was angry with curiosity as I ripped it open. The note had been quickly scribbled out, but the words there gave me a gut-busting shock of air that coursed down to my very bone structure with a chill. We've been looking where you were, and we think you're the solution to what happened there. We must speak with you. Call us now. I had initially thought it to be some sort of prank, perhaps some sort of insane prank, such as the fear that I, for some reason, frightened the world away. But something inside me, some inner primitive part of me, warned me and alerted me that this was not an accident. That terrible house I'd suffered through all those years still had some hold on me that I never achieved, some sort of keeping me for itself. Memories engulfed my head, new and horrible, as if I stood in the terrible building, shut in between encroaching walls. I was hesitant in the beginning. I did not want to return. I did not want to confront what followed me all these years, but I couldn't help but be drawn towards knowing the truth. So, much against my wish, I called the number inscribed on the letter. The man on the phone was serene, near anonymity, but with an edge of desperation in his tone. "We've been looking into your former address," the man said, "and we've discovered something disturbing. The house is older than it looks. It's much older. It was constructed on a piece of land with a tainted history. Folks have been complaining things were happening there for centuries, but always they would attribute it to something otherworldly. We think whatever occurs in this house is not otherworldly. It's much worse, something that feeds on fear." My head was spinning, memories conflicting in my mind as I considered the inexplicable occurrences, the shadows, the whispers, the presence. The detective continued telling them that they had discovered remains of previous owners of the house and that all of them perished in the same way. Others fled the house in fear, and others simply vanished into thin air. My fingers trembled on the phone pressed against my ear. "They've all left something behind," the detective spoke softly, voice firm. "Their fear, and growing with each new tenant. We believe the house is alive, something vampiric on the residents' fear. It draws them deeper and deeper until they're eaten whole by it. But it isn't. What we've discovered, what's within the house, it breeds. It copies itself again and again and again. And you're part of the cycle." I shivered at a cold creeping deep into the bones. It was the ground itself trembling, the very foundation of life trembling under it to something much darker underneath. "What are you saying?" I could whisper. "You were its most recent victim," she was told by the detective. "But you are also its gateway to the next. You will not be leaving anywhere. It has waited for you to come back." The words were ice, slicing through my heart, imprisoning me. The horror which I had fought to hide far back in the darkest recesses of my mind now churned, frothing its way upwards, and the worst that I had ever known was out there. The house, the fear, it would never end. I tried to push aside the terror that had seized me after the phone call. I got out of the city proper into the rest of the country. But the truth, as much as the house itself, was one I could not shake. Wherever I was, its shadow over me, hanging at the edges of my mind, waiting, watching. I thought that I had outlived the shadows, that I could go out, but already horror had ensnared itself in the very center of myself. In motionless night, eyelids closed, I could still hear the footsteps, could still feel the shadow just beyond my range of vision. The whispers returned, soft at first, but growing day by day, until they churned in my brain. Wherever I strayed, however far, the house remained, waited for the next round to begin. Appalling fear that I'd somehow escaped stuck, inside me now, a shattered, insidious thing that clung and wouldn't release. I never returned to the house, but I never responded to the investigators a second time either. But they were right. The house had a pattern, and I was caught in it. The pattern of fear would begin, growing and on, a chain with no end. Each new spirit that haunted it, each new mind that gave in to its wicked pull. And so am I now, weighed down by the fact that the house where it is still stands. And somewhere else, another will be trapped. The cycle will repeat. It always does. All I can hope for is that the next time it returns, they won't be as cursed as I am. But in the back of my mind, I know that it won't be long before the next show is performed. I used to think that evil did not always make a sound. It is not always screaming or blood-stained walls or insisting on revealing itself so that it will be noticed. It can approach slowly, like a chill fog over a lake, distant, suffocating, and unending. I didn't know this when I bought the house on Hemlock Lane. It was a crumbling Victorian house on the edge of a dying town, half forgotten by time. The house itself lasted nearly a century, slowly rotting under the thick silence it wore. I bought it for what it was worth, not for how it looked, a ridiculously low price that should have served as a warning and not a blessing. The building itself was massive, the ceilings so towering and the passages so narrow that they appeared to slope lower than I had initially imagined. In there, a person was greeted by chilly coldness even at the heart of midsummer, as if interiorly hated the heat. It was, nevertheless, the second floor, or the room towards the other extremity of the passage, which was of particular interest. It did not have a keyhole, and although the door looked like any ordinary door at first glance, it felt like there was something weird, gravity-like pull, as if waiting for something. I attributed it the first week. I had work to complete, boxes to unpack, utilities to hook up, and a new life to construct. But the house had other plans for me that day. Each evening, respectfully, I'd listen to the light, deliberate tread upstairs in my bedroom. There were no slippers or shoes in the house that could produce such a tread. The tread was human, but empty, an echo without cause. When I first climbed up to have a look, there was nothing to be seen. The door at the end of the hall remained closed but tight, and I knew I had just escaped by a hair, so to speak, something like an arrested breath of air after a depletion of the lungs. With the passage of time, the footsteps evolved. They developed spasmodic habits, usually freezing in mid-stride and beginning in random locations. I woke up twice to the noise of what I assumed was something being dragged, material or flesh being pulled across rotten wood. I battled fear, but I explained every creak, every shiver as the normal creaks of an old house adjusting to itself. But in the depths of my mind, beneath the surface, I knew that the house was not vacant. I knew that I was not alone. My sleep deteriorated. Darkness in my bedroom was not vacancy any longer. It was presence, heavy but invisible, which pressed against the flesh and caused ideas I wasn't ready for. Sleep was not escape. It was stinking maze passages and enormous dark shadows looming on the periphery of sight perpetually. Whenever I was approaching the door in such dreams, I woke up drenched in sweat, racing heart, as if I had barely escaped from something incomprehensible. Curiosity, as it has so often in the end, ultimately overcame caution. I leaned on the door closer one morning. There was no lock, no handle, but a brass knob which was warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been. I leaned against it, eavesdropping. The sound was very indistinct at first, nearly non-existent. But the longer I remained there, the louder it became. A scratching, regular sound, not unlike fingernails on vellum. It was conscious, aimed, and persisted, even after I'd moved away. I struggled with myself for days about whether to open it. I paced back and forth down the hall, standing in front of its door, extending a hand from time to time to reach out and feel for the knob, and then draw it back. Something within me was intimidated by fear that as soon as this door was opened, it might never be closed again. On the 9th night at 3:11 a.m., I was woken by breathing. Not mine. Quiet, but clear, grating, wet, and agonizingly slow. Above me. I did not wait. I took a flashlight and went upstairs. My body preceded my mind, driven by something primal and desperate. I stood in front of the door and wrapped my hand around the handle. It opened creakily with ease. The room was black. Not dark. Black. As though light had been refused admittance. Even my flashlight hesitated, its beam falling as it crossed the doorway. The air inside was denser than I'd ever experienced. It was heavy with stench and rot, and something else other, like an odor of extreme age. The floor groaned beneath my step as I entered. I swept the beam lightly back and forth. Symbols on the walls. Not scratch marks, not paint, but carvings. Phrases and symbols in a language that was not mine, carved deep into the wood as if by someone desperate to be remembered, or someone desperate to seal something up. There was a bed that filled the center of the room. It was darkly stained and long dry, and above it a cracked and dusty mirror. I walked towards it cautiously. The face it showed was not mine. It showed the room as it had been, neat and organized, furnished and occupied. There was a woman in the corner, her back to me. She danced under enchantment, head thrown back, shaking hands at her sides. She turned around and faced him. Her face was not unpleasant in any ordinary sense. It was featureless, smooth, white, as cold wax hanging on the edge of flaccidity. But because it had nothing, it was more so. It suggested that whatever she was infinitely beyond cleansing. The mirror shattered. I did not scream, though all my muscles cried to scream. I stepped out of the room, never losing sight of the door once until it closed again. I arrived at my bedroom and locked the door, though I knew this act was futile. The house no longer deceived her. At the hour of night, sleeping and waking were one. I would awaken somewhere in the house without recalling how I got there. One morning, I awoke at the top of the stairs, gazing at the door to the upstairs room, my hand already turned to the knob. I began to see her, not just in dreams, but in thoughts, in shadows. even in the space between eye blinks. She took up residence in the cracks of my mind, etching her face into the retinas of my eyes. She had moments when she'd appear beside my bedside. Sometimes I'd see her watching me from behind the drapery or in the warped patterns of the wallpaper. That mirror in that one room did not just reflect her, but call to her. I tried leaving the house. I had a suitcase packed and halfway down the driveway when the engine died. No one knew why the car would not budge, but when I drove farther than the house, my chest would constrict, my eyes would blur, and I'd feel as though I were drowning. The house did not want me to leave. I realized that I was no longer a tenant. I was an artist. I grew weaker every day. My reflection in the mirror changed. At first, it was insignificant. Those scars that I didn't have on my body. Darker eyes, rounder shoulders. Eventually, it became increasingly unsettling. My reflection smiled whenever mine did not. It moved whenever I didn't. Finally, it ceased to reflect me. It turned into something different, something that glared. I had taped up all the mirrors in the house, but still I could feel it. The look, the weight, choking me, starving me for oxygen. My thoughts, not my own. I would discover sentences in my notebook that I never wrote. Had written, perhaps, but words from that same strange language in the room upstairs now found their way on the edges of my journals, scrawled in a mad, unsteady hand. I learned the house wasn't haunted, not in the way one might imagine. It wasn't a ghost house. It was a house that consumed. It consumed loneliness, fear, the slow erosion of self. It waited patiently until you were too broken to run. Then it crept into your space, piece of soul by piece of soul, until whatever seemed to be you wasn't you anymore. I tried to burn the room down for the first and final time. I stocked up on supplies, gasoline, matches, even iron and salt, anything I could scrounge up in the mad corners of the internet. I soaked the gasoline all over the place, on the floor, on the walls, along the bed. I lit the match and threw it at the room. Nothing lit. The fire just never occurred until the earth had not yet started stretching towards it, burned not by wind or rain, but by something else, something that would not quit. I huddled on the floor, hollow and defeated. I knew the house would never be burned, for it was beyond fire's reach. It was not wood and nails. It was something else, something base. It attempted to make me give in, and I almost did. But even the ruins contain fragments of will. Even the devoured have bone. On the final day that I was at home in the house, I walked upstairs again. I stood outside and pushed on it. There she sat, back of it, behind. The woman did not cower within the wall. She sat on the mattress, had laid her head and stretched out arms, saluted, nay warned. Behind her, the mirror had reshaped itself. Its cracks were veins on its face, throbbing with gentle red light. My own face was erased from it. The surface showed nothing but shadow. I turned and departed. I came down the stairs and exited through the front door. And this time the house did not retain me. It had drawn as much of me as it could. But it had not taken all of me. I never returned. I brought everything with me there. My belongings, my papers, even my name. I packed up and moved to a different city, changed my name, and began anew away from Hemlock Lane. But I am not free. Every mirror I walk by is catching for me the room. Every night, her eyes slice through the mask of sleep. I do not know how many additional days I am able to restrain myself as myself. The house had left with me something in me, something growing, something waiting. And sometimes when I wake up deep in the middle of the night, I can see myself staring at a door that never arrived before. And I know, it waits. A few more days I can be myself. The house had left something behind in me, something developing, something waiting. And sometimes when I wake up during the dead of night, I am standing in front of a door, one that never arrived before, and I know, it waits.